where should we go from here? We can go little kids. A lot of us had horses here in Winter Garden, and we would ride our horses down the railroad track and tie them up on the railroad sign and go into one of two drugstores that were there, either Tibble's Rexall drugstore on the corner of Main and Plant, or Davis drugstore, which was in the middle of the block, which was the most popular of all the drugstores and where the older kids always went. So when we got older, we went there. And then about that same time, there's a building on North Main Street that still remains. The Baptist Church owns it, and it belonged to the Florida Telephone Company. Today it belongs to the Baptist Church, but it is where the operator on the second floor had the switchboard, and it was a one-lady operation at the time, and the numbers here in Winter Garden, for example, my home number here was 39. No area code. Nobody ever thought about that. And my dad's office, which was located where in the building where the Bert Valdez restaurant is, he and Mr. McMillan were partners. His office number was 112, and our P.O. box number for business was 9. And of course, they didn't have any zip codes. In fact, back to the telephone business then. One day, Herbert Pounds had taken a little trip, and he and his wife, and so he was trying to locate his children. They stayed home with a sitter, and so he called the house and nobody answered. So then he called to the telephone office, and the telephone operator says, "Oh, hey Herbert, how you doing?" Says, "You on a trip?" "Yeah." Says, "Well, I'm trying to find my children." She says, "Oh, they're fine. They just walked by the outside. I saw them, so no problem." And then when I would call one of my buddies like Delmas Davis or Larry Grimes or something, and their home number wouldn't answer, the operator would pull her plug out, and she says, "Oh, Jerry," says, "he's not at home. He's over at Larry's house. I'll plug you in." So she'd plug in there. I mean, and everybody knew. One of the disadvantages of growing up in Winter Garden is that everybody knew what everybody did. And I was known as Little Jerry in those days, and I couldn't get away with anything because, I mean, everybody would tell on you, and parents would know, and you had to, and which was not all bad. In fact, Winter Garden had a program in the summertime that they called the Builders Program, and everybody attended it. It was down at the lakefront where the swimming pool is. They gave swimming lessons. They gave craft lessons. You had games in the fields there, and you had field trips, and they were trying to build the youth. It was a great thing. The recreation department, operated, and along those lines, the Boy Scout troop was very important here. Everybody became a Boy Scout when they were 12 years old, and I'm very happy that I had received an Eagle Award here, and I didn't realize how important it was going to be when I did it. I just did it because it was the steps you went through. But now, when you read about the astronauts, the first thing they say, they were an Eagle Scout. And I'm happy to say that the same scout troop that I was a member of is still operating today and still very strong. Dr. John Kappelman is one of the leaders there. And they have their own bus and their own trailer, and they've done very well in fact, Derek Blakesley's son is just getting his Eagle Award right now. So they've really continued, which is unusual because many things start and then they don't finish. So I'm happy to know that the Methodist Church sponsors that and they keep it going. So one thing that the people on Lake Butler, everybody thinks that's Windermere, but actually in the old days, the whole west side of Lake Butler was the Winter Garden side. And the Winter Garden side was all filled with camps. They weren't really fishing camps, they were just camps. And many of the families here would move out of their houses in the summertime and go to Lake Butler. And it would be a little wooden cabin, and it would pump water out of the lake, and you would have indoor plumbing, but it was rather rustic. And the Kappelman family had a camp, they still have, and the Pounds family had a camp, and Russell Pounds and Herbert Pounds and Franklin and Gene Kappelman, they were all big buddies. So one of their jobs was, when the Kaplan family moved to the lake for the summer and the Pounds family moved, that Franklin and Herbert Pound's job was to walk the family cow from Winter Garden to Lake Butler. Took them a day, but they did it. And same time when I was getting my bicycling merit badge in the Scouts, there were 3 of us that rode our bikes from Winter Garden to Kissimmee to see the zoo, have a picnic, and come back. It was a 60-mile trip, and it was on 535. And we might have seen 3 or 4 cars the whole day. I mean, it just, we had no traffic, we had no crime, we had, I mean, it was Mayberry. I mean, there was just, you know, had no key. I was never growing up, never given a key and said, this is the key to the house. I'm not sure we had a key to the house, because it was just, there was one policeman in Winter Garden, and he lived in the old city hall, which is now located on Plant Street where the police department is. That was, in fact, that building was built as a WPA project in 1935. Mayor Walker, who was an electrician in town, he was the mayor, and he was smart enough to get the City Hall building built as a WPA project, the swimming pool down at Lake Apopka built as a project. The 2, they called them yacht basins, although there were never any yachts there. There were fishing boats full there. And then if you've seen it, the walkways over the 2, they built those, and they built the baseball stadium. So we got a lot of good stimulus money in 1935 and to help the structure of Winter Garden. But the City Hall, you walked up a number of steps, and you were there, but below it was the jail and the apartment where the police chief lived. And there was one policeman, and I remember when I was a kid, it was Milton Johns, and he lived there, and they had 4 cells, and if we were playing around or something, and just for a joke, a lot of times they'd pick us up and put us in the cell for an hour to shape up. You know, we thought that was great. It's just like a movie. But, and I tell Sue this story, and she doesn't believe it. They fed the prisoners pigeon pie. There were a lot of pigeons in the area, and that's honest truth. They fed them pigeon pie, and they had the pigeon sticking upside down in the pie a lot of times. And of course, all that changed. They used to have their own judge in Winter Garden and your own court system. And then as we modernized and got bigger, the county took over those services, and so you no longer had the jail here, and you no longer had the judge here. In fact, the man that's in charge of volunteers at the Heritage Museum right now is Ted Vandeventer, and he was the city judge, the municipal judge at that time. But he now is very active in the museum. So let's see, well, for example, there were 7 or 8 packing houses around Winter Garden. Keene, Ergang, South Lake, Winter Garden Exchange. They were all on this line here, railroad line, because they shipped. In 1940, more citrus was shipped out of Winter Garden than any other place in the world. So it was the citrus center. There were over 100,000 acres of citrus trees in Orange County. And then in 1960, there were 60,000 left. Today, there are barely 3,000 acres of citrus left in Orange County. Now, next door, Lake County has about 30,000 acres, and many of those are owned by Orange County people. But urbanization is really one of the factors. But imports are another big factor. Brazil and Mexico are sending in a lot of fruit that they didn't used to, especially juice. And ironically, all the tree huggers that don't want some of our pesticides that we use, the companies say, okay, so they don't sell them to us anymore. They ship them to Mexico and to Brazil. They put them on the same fruit, and then we eat the same fruit. So we think we're doing great, but we aren't. And But Lake Butler has always been a gem. We all learned to swim there. We learned to water ski there. In those days, a few families had the camps, as I mentioned. My folks never had a camp there, but some of our friends did, and everybody had the opportunity to go there and to spend the night, camp out, and to hunt alligators, and I mean all the things Huckleberry Finn did. I mean, you did here, and I remember as a kid, there was a lot of jungle between Lake Apopka and where the people lived, and after school and in the summertime, we spent a lot of time going through the jungle and making forts and stuff down in there. Whereas, you know, when I was growing up here, you went to school, you got out of school at 3:30. Usually you went by the house and dropped off a book or two, and then you said goodbye and you came back for supper. I mean, your folks didn't say, where are you going to be, what are you going to do, and they didn't put you in the car and drive you everywhere. You were free to do what you wanted to. And today, you know, we kind of, because of the population and the traffic and the crime, you can't do that. So once again, how fortunate we were to live at the time we lived, and how fortunate we were to have people that were interested in the community. The Edgewater Hotel was built by community donations. It was a community project. Jimmy Pitchford had a beautiful grocery store on an empty lot right now that's across the street from the Baptist Church, and that was built by community support. And it was, for 20 years, it was the grocery store for Winter Garden until Publix came in and, you know, bigger and better things. But Winter Garden has had a lot of good support from the business community, and we always wanted to be bigger and better, and agriculture brought us to that point. And we're still, I think we're going to see, just because where Winter Garden's located, near Disney and near Orlando, that Sue and I were in Atlanta not long ago, and we were at Buckhead in a hotel, and I looked out, and I was about the 15th floor, and I looked out and said, gosh, look at the skyline of downtown Atlanta. Wonder how far we are. So I asked, well, we're about 10 miles. I said, gee, here we are in Buckhead. It's a huge, big city, and we're 10 miles from Atlanta. Guess how far Winter Garden is from Orlando? I mean, the sky's the limit. Winter Garden has no boundaries, and you know, how fortunate we are to have Winter Garden Village. And the only reason we had it is because the Fowler family had that big grove and the land was available. And ironically, that land was given to a family to homestead by the federal government free when they were given, I think President Arthur was the president, and they gave 160 acres if you signed off to homestead it. So that was given, I think their name, I didn't do my homework on this, but I think it's something like the Hendricksons or something, some family they gave it to, but their cousins were the Fowlers. So, I mean, here, 100 years later, the Mrs. Fowler, who lived there and was a member of the Winter Garden Exchange, she was able to sell that for multi-million dollars. But what a beautiful development they made of that. And so I think how fortunate we are to have on one end of town the very latest shopping and restaurants, and on the other end of town, the historic center, which looks like a movie set. And the reason, some of the reason that we have the old city left is that when I was graduating from high school around the early 50s, Highway 50 was built, and they skirted the town. They didn't go, the old highway went from Orlando, called the old Winter Garden Road. There were 26 curves between Orlando and Winter Garden, went through Ocoee and Plant Street. Well, when they built Highway 50, they made it straight, but they bypassed Winter Garden. So for years, we thought, gee, we've been bypassed. All the progress is out here. They've forgotten about downtown, and it was empty and not in very good shape. Well, how fortunate we were, because that's why we were able to make it more pedestrian-oriented and take out the railroad tracks, which nobody thought would ever happen, and put the trail through. And the opposite of that is Apopka, where 441 went right through the main street, Now it's dead over there. You can't walk across the street. So some things happen without planning. We're just lucky. And